Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with rebellious, adventurous and sometimes courteous free spirits. Gemma, thank you very much. Welcome to the Meeting People podcast. I'm delighted that you could spare the time. I wanted to talk to you about all things neuroplasticity, which is a topic that has become of interest to me recently, and also about your work with this organisation that you founded called Neuro Frontiers, if that's all right.
Oh yes, I mean thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a joy to be here, and yes, I'd be delighted to talk about all those things. Thank you.
Great. Well, I thought we'd kick off with a difficult part of the conversation, I suppose, which is how it all began for you. What kickstarted your interest in this area and this journey that you've been on, I think is over the last 14, 15 years or so, to really become a subject matter expert in this area. Can you just talk us through that take as long as you need?
Oh, I don't know if I could call myself an expert. I aspire to be one, but there's literally every day there's something new to learn. So, but thank you. So yes, I mean, when you say this subject area, so neuroplasticity is one aspect, but this is more neuroplasticity therapy. So we'll go into this, I'm sure, later, but in a very dumbed down way, these are things which can help your brain to work better. So it's an area of neuroscience, and it's a translational neuroscience. So you're translating the neuroscience and making it good, for practical use. So that's the area, and really, yes, it's a journey that I'm on, but it's more of a blessing in some ways as well, a silver lining. There are silver linings to this journey, and and it started out as quite a dark cloud. So. It started because of my son. So my son, 16 years ago, he was born, and not long after that, he started having seizures, and it was a very traumatic time, very challenging, and then he remained having seizures for about 4 years, and these were day and night, and the very first one that he had was just a baby, and then he turned blue, and so at that time they didn't know what they were, and soon after that it became a hospital stay of about 3 months. We might be let out for a few days and then be back in the hospital, and then there was an outbreak of swine flu, so I was literally in a box room, because he hadn't had all of his vaccinations for about 3 months, which was, that would be challenging to most people in itself. But on top of that, I was getting no sleep, because his seizures would be every couple of hours or so, and they started getting up and up. So that was a very difficult time, And then when they realised it was epilepsy, which it was, they said, "Oh, you can go home now." I was like, "Wow!" So, but what about getting better? So they tried lots of different drugs. So he did go home, but I was trapped with him, really. So it was very difficult.
Yeah. Was this your first child? Was this your first time, babe?
No, this was my. I've got 2 gorgeous children, but my daughter had been born 2 years earlier, so I knew how a normal baby should be behaving, and I knew that this was very difficult. And then I had a 2-year-old I should be looking after, and that was heartbreaking as well. So, and then she's just been incredible, and I feel very grateful to her for being so incredible. But equally, I feel very guilty that she's had to be so incredible.
You feel she almost had to grow up faster than she would have done because of the sort of having this younger sibling come into the household that is the focus, in many ways, of a lot more tension than she was probably used to.
Yes, huge amounts of attention, and she's just such a lovely child, and I loved spending time with her. I still do, but it was so difficult to spend time because I had to be dealing with emergency after emergency after emergency, and then also when he would go to try after a seizure, he needed a good recovery period of sleeping, and then that would sort of abate the next one arriving so soon. If he didn't only had a small sleep, oh gosh, we're going to have another one. So for her, I kept saying, "Oh, be quiet! Let's be really quiet." So there was no joy and laughter in the house, and that's what it was. It's ever so sad. And and my experience isn't isolated. Excuse me. I work with many families now, and over the years I've seen hundreds of families, and they have similar experiences. How this ripple effect, there's one challenging situation, it has this ripple effect across the whole family, and so it's not an easy life. I grew, I'll say, disillusioned or lost faith in the conventional medicine services because they couldn't stop this. We would try a new drug and then it might work for a few weeks, or might not work at all, but that whatever, the effects would wear off and then we would be back to not being able to, not having control of seizures again. So it was really hard for about 4 years, and so in those 4 years, because I was trapped, the life is a trap. It was a great inspiration to just do anything I could do to find out about seizures, epilepsy, the brain, everything. So I just took a deep dive into all the literature that was out there. I read thousands and thousands of papers. I wasn't a great social media fan, but then went on to Facebook and started a couple of groups there, and then found some like-minded people that were also on this. There must be some answers out there, and then I was very lucky to interact with some incredibly wise, wonderful people who pointed me in different directions or said, "This is what I found out," and then I went off down lots of, not necessarily rabbit holes, but just areas of knowledge and thinking, all right. And then I started putting bits of the puzzle together in my head. By the time my son so diet was one thing that we worked with my son, and so he went from having just over 500 seizures a month and a week, to 104 a week on average. Because we changed
seizures a week is quite the number.
That was day and night, you see, and that's really, really hard because I was getting between 2 and 3 hours, and so was he, 2 and 3 hours of broken sleep a day. So it's just horrendous. And then you're supposed to function. I mean, it's sleep deprivation. Spies get taught how to cope with sleep deprivation if you're, but
Of course.
special needs parents, we are expert at this. You could,
Yeah.
we can deal with that. It's incredible how what you can cope with. It's not healthy though.
And
It
it's
really
it's the hope that kills you, I guess, is that will this be the medication that works? Will this diet change be the one that, and you're kind of looking for a silver bullet in your, in your mind, hopefully, and then there's that kind of competing tension between the hope and the kind of having to be strong and, keep battling through. And was it like a switch that flipped? Like, I need to figure this out now myself because the health establishment is just not up to the, they don't have the capability or the interest or the incentive or the motivation, whichever or all of the above, to try and find the answer here beyond just trying different drugs that are on the market. Or was it a gradual process where you were like just getting more and more into the literature as you were trying to learn more about your son's condition that snowballed into or was there just a moment you're like, right, over to me now because the professionals aren't able to do this right now?
Right. So the professionals are mainly an incredible bunch of people, really, dedicated and most people in the health service have got an amazing heart and want to do the right thing. The same applies in education. Many teachers want to help and do the right thing and get the child to flourish in some way. So, so their heart's in the right place, but do they have all the tools in their toolbox? And what became increasingly obvious as I went through the literature was that there are some things which can be tried and that have worked in certain cases, that weren't being tried by the NHS, and not, and there's two things at fault. Training doesn't include some of these things for medical professionals, and then the systems preclude them from doing that. So the UK system has gone down a very similar route to the American system, where we are very litigious now. People can sue each other, so you don't want to practice out. You can't do anything outside the scope of your practice, or even if you've been to a conference. Yeah, but as a doctor, and most other medical professionals, you're supposed to keep do a certain number of hours of CPD. This is continuous professional development, in order to continue practicing. So you have to tick off those hours. You might go to a conference. You might hear from an amazing, researcher from, I don't know, somewhere else in the world, and then they say, "Oh yes, this works on 100% of patients." Blah blah, but you can't tell your patient the next day because it's not written in the protocol. So you can't, you might maybe leave a paper out and hope that they'll notice it, but that's not good enough. So it's a strange scenario in that way, that there are barriers. Even if the person has read all the literature, they can't tell patients about this. So. You said where did this is this sort of I think you're looking for when my epiphany happened. Is that what you're really saying?
Or epiphany, or kind of at what point did your obviously you were, if something happens to your, anyone's, when my children get ill or have something, I kind of end up Googling the thing, and then I start learning a bit more about it. But they would probably have come a point in your let's say 400 steps after that, where you were like, actually, now I need to do something about this myself. And you went from following instruction and trying to taking the lead. And I'm just kind of curious, did you know that early on, or was that a gradual process?
So a gradual process would be, So I thought, I'm very solutions focused, but I know that you can only make the best decisions with the best information, or enough of the best information. So you want, so I did start collecting data. I just initially the hospital asks you to say, when did your child go to sleep, when do they feed, have they had any bowel movements, so you note all these things down and the time that they did it, and they've got little sheets that you can do it. Well, that became a habit. I just continued that. I didn't, because I thought anything could help. If this is what they want, then I'll keep on giving clues and giving them information, because that might mean something to them. Now, as it turned out, that with my son, this did mean something, but nobody had put two things together. It wasn't something they were trained to notice or put together. So that's one aspect of something that I was measuring, and then I think later on, because as the process developed and I was reading these things, I did think to trial things. I ask a medical professional whether this would do any harm, or whether I'm okay to do this, and then I tried things on myself, and I thought I'll see how that feels for me. I don't want to put my child through this unless I've tried it myself. So that was another method, if you like. So I started experimenting, and that was
and it began with diet, right? So what did you do with the diet to sorry, you're going to interrupt, correct me. Correct me, and then go to the diet. I'm focusing on this because I'm really keen to just kind of get into the journey, so that it better informs what comes, the solutions that we see on the other side when we visit your website and all, the output of all that journey. But it's to better get an understanding of that. I really want to kind of properly understand how you got there, if that makes sense.
I tried all sorts of things. I thought, oh, what happens if a nurse suggested that some children seem to do better if they sleep on one side or the other side. So he had little rolled up towels to see if that would help him. It was just anecdotal grandma things, and I went down to Sussex, and this is over a period of 4 years. So this wasn't all immediate. This was as things go. I went down to Sussex and did a treatment with him for hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and some strange flannels that you pressed on things. We went up to Leyland, where's that? Lancashire, that direction near, or it was either Lancashire or Cumbria, and did something called handle therapy up there. I was just trying all different things. It was a scattergun approach. It really was, using too many things. I didn't understand what I was doing, but I wanted to do something. That feeling of not having, of wanting to have some control over this, and not because you're controlling, but because you want to help your child. Your role as a mother or as a parent drives you to want to look after your child, to control the situation, so that you so that
you can say mother. I mean, it is a mother's instinct for sure. Speaking as a father, I'll give that to you as.
Fathers take more risks. Push you on the swings harder and higher. It's fine. But mothers are definitely the cotton wool, bearers. Yeah.
But also, evolutionarily, you need the mothers to kind of worry and do those things. Otherwise, the survival chances go down versus the risk takers. So it's a good yin and yang. But so you had a kind of this scattergun approach where you were trying, I guess, looking for silver bullets, if that's the right way to look at it. Not intentionally, but maybe this fix or this sort of little manipulation of the environment or whatever it might be will kind of cause an alleviation or a cure or whatever the right word is. And it was scattergun. And at what point? Yeah, keep going. Yeah, if you keep going on the kind of what came next.
Yeah, so I think my error, if you like, had been thinking that epilepsy and seizures are one thing. So epilepsy and seizures, now I know, are a secondary symptom. There's always a root cause, and they are the secondary symptoms. So people think of them as a diagnosis, but actually you're finding a symptom, and the truest diagnosis would be finding the root cause of that. So you look online and you might join a group, and I've still got some groups on Facebook, and people say, oh, what works for seizures, has anyone tried this? But you need to appreciate that there are such a wide range of root causes which cause the similar outward event, symptom of having a seizure, plus lots of other things. So having been in that naive place where I thought, oh yes, epilepsy, I'll just see what works for that, and then you look and then gosh, there seems to be loads of things. I thought I'll try loads of things just to see, and then that didn't work next, and that hope thing that you just talked about, it keeps you going, because you think, okay, well, at least we're not at the end of the line now. Whereas with the NHS, it must be really hard to work in that environment where your options are very limited, and you've got 6 or 8 drugs, and you try one, try two, then you try combinations, and then eventually you're out. Nothing's worked. So then what's next? We're blessed to be able to, in a way, have access to information. But my error had not been my naivety in not realising I needed to tailor that information to my son's case. But anyway, it gave me a wide range of experiences, and I met lots of amazing people along that journey. So.
And that thing you say is very interesting, the kind of epilepsy seizures are a symptom, they're not a root cause. And so if you spend your whole time trying to address the symptom, you're never going to identify what could be the thing that's called the manifestation, what is causing these symptoms to manifest. And what kind of happened next? How did the journey continue from that, from trying this scattergun approach to alleviate these downstream effects?
Diet was a huge step. Realizing that there were certain things that you could take out of the diet, and that improved him enormously. Later on, I'd have to.
What were they? So it was, if you went from 500 seizures to 100, is that right? With some dietary changes. So what out of interest, what was that? Gluten, dairy, sugar? What was the type of thing?
It was interesting. So even as a clue, so he would only eat 5 things. I think he must have been about 2 or 3. So because he'd weaned and he was definitely eating himself. So he would eat pasta, toast, Cheerios, hula hoops, and I think the last one was milk. Anyway,
sounds like my daughter's diet. Yeah.
So those are very, inflammatory, and they're not highly nutritious. Anything that's nutritious within them has been fortified. Sorry. So it's not true nutrition. It's not fresh food. So this is not. I'm sorry to hear that your daughter's, on a similar diet. Sorry.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I was being glib to say, because that's what they want to eat is Cheerios, hula hoops, and pasta and bread is kind of the go-to, and then it's a battle to get them to eat something else. But ignore me.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah.
So there was a day I'd come into the kitchen and he was on the floor and he'd poured out a whole box of Cheerios and was just eating them and eating them and eating them, and then his seizures were terrible. So I was, so that was a clue that something was not going right. There was something happening there. There was a cause and effect. So diet. We took out gluten and dairy. Massively reduce the sugar and soya. I think those were. It was a sort of a gradual period, but we got there, and then his seizures went right down, and because you don't know how all these variables, you think, well, I don't, I was still trying some other things as well because I was so desperate, but we went on holiday to Wales, and we couldn't find all the things, and just thought, just a week off, let's go back. So that was it. His seizures came back with a vengeance. So then it was right. We're going back to and then they went down again. So it was there's definitely seems to be some correlation here. So that was the first blessing for us to learn that. Do you want me to carry on with?
Please. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. But in his 3rd year, a number of things happened. They found that he had a brain tumour, but equally my sort of research was coming along as well, and I understood a few more things. And then during that time, I learned about breathing. So that's when, if I go back to when he was a baby and I started making notes, right in the hospital, I noticed that his breathing had a certain pattern to it just before he would have a seizure. Now 3 months in hospital is a long time, so with seizures happening every couple of hours, I have plenty of opportunities to press the red button, then everyone comes, and then to see what happens. Then I started pressing the red button before he would have a seizure and saying, he's about to have one, and then he would have one. And I'm not some sort of guru or anything like that. It was just because I had noticed this, but it's not on conventional doctors' radars to really monitor the breath. So, but I can put that in hindsight now. I can say, gosh, that was so relevant. That's so relevant to my son. And so I had also been putting together a number of ideas into my head, and then came up one day, and I'm very grateful to some of the people I met online who pointed me in the right direction. but I suddenly had a great eureka moment and realised that if I breathed out, or if I could get some carbogen, it was called, into my son's nose, then, or into my son, then I could. It's carbogen is a mixture of carbon dioxide and oxygen. So I thought, if I could get some carbogen into my son, then I could make him stop his seizures, or as a first aid method to halt a seizure. So not to stop them in the first place, but to halt them if they started. So I tried British BOC, the something chemistry, British something in chemistry. They're the gas people, and you might see their big lorries driving along the road. So I tried them, and they said, no, you need some sort of license. Are you a university? No. so I couldn't do that. And then I realised, that you've actually got a free supply of carbogen that comes out of your mouth all the time, which because that is a mixture of carbon dioxide and oxygen. And then putting some more things together, read a study on mice and realised that that the best thing to do would be to breathe this mixture into somebody's nose. So we've been doing with another friend who was following and taking part in contributing to this thought process. Was in Austria, and he said, "Oh, let's use plastic bags." So breathing into plastic bags and then whooshing it in our faces, in the face of your thing. But then we were thinking, well, this is quite good, but it doesn't make it doesn't look very good if you go to the supermarket, you blow into a plastic bag and then whack a plastic bag over your baby's head. It's just not.
No, it's a bad look. Yeah,
it's a really bad look. So yes, then I realised you've got this free source coming out of your own. Out of your mouth, not your mouth necessarily, well, it would be your mouth. So yes, so then that was my eureka moment, putting lots of things together and realising just breathe out of your mouth into your son's nose. And I sat with that thought, I read back over what I thought, could this be right? So 48 hours, I think it was roughly, when I'd had the thought of trying this and thinking, God, this could really work. What would it do? Could it do any harm? And then I tried it, and that was it. Just a seizure would just stop. So
you built up this intuition, almost like a skill. That's how people learn skills, right? Is they have repeat exposure to something, and then they build up this sort of sixth sense or intuition, and you could tell when your son was about to have a seizure because you spotted the patterns that would manifest before the seizure would happen, and then. Then you had this solution, which was to, I guess, is it like what scuba divers do in first aid courses? I remember having to do a first aid course in the water where if someone had passed out in the water, you'd have to get to the surface and then you'd clamp your lips around their nose and make an airtight seal, and then you just blow in. You can't do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the water, basically, because the water will get into their lungs if you're trying to do mouth-to-mouth whilst you're swimming. So you have to do it around the nose, and you go, you kind of breathe out, exhale heavily into their nose to get some air into them. Is that the same, what you were doing exactly?
I'm going to look into this. And why that would be a good thing. But it would, now in what I know, that makes a lot of sense. So yes, essentially you are, but you're not giving a very hard breath. It's not necessary to give a hard breath. There is some motion necessary, but you wouldn't have to be breathing your full strength into the nose. Okay. But that's interesting, and it's something I'll look up now to understand that sort of first aid, because it might contribute towards the.
Good.
Yeah, so thank you.
And this would cut the seizure effectively. Yeah. You would apply the breath to the nose, to your son's nose, and it would stop a seizure flat. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, it would just stop the seizure. So when you say if I noticed his breathing going awry, so that was very easy in a hospital setting because you have monitors, and so I'm watching the monitors, seeing, so it's easy to see when his breathing goes differently. It's more difficult when somebody's sat across the other side of the room and you're chopping up some mushrooms. You can't be just focusing on their torso or their chest, or listening, and he hasn't got any equipment. So yes, he would often start having a seizure. So it would be more progressed than that, and then and then I would just administer it, and then it would stop. And then so prior to that, what would happen is that he would have a seizure, which would last 5 minutes, and then up to 5 minutes, and then he would have to sleep for a couple of hours, and it would just be so stressful. So you've got a young daughter, wanting to be picked up from school, and that would be my one daily trip out, and then he might have a seizure, and then you're in a dilemma. Oh gosh, if I put him in the car, then he will stay awake, he won't go to sleep, but I will be late for my daughter. So all of these things were just so stressful. Or you'd say, if everyone was at home, right, silence in the house now, silence in the house because he's had a seizure, he's asleep. But so then the quality of life that changed after that, extraordinary change, because he was just back in the room, and then he would just carry on what he was doing before, and that was it's just incredible that he didn't need any recovery time, or if it had progressed, if the seizure had progressed, it would be far less, and his memory then would be better, if you like. So yeah.
And did you say it transpired that he had a brain tumor? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, it
So
did.
how old was he when you found that out? How far into the?
I was in his third year. He was 3 years old, and then yes, and so then there was some tests that we needed to go through, just for assessment purposes. Multiple MRIs, and they couldn't sedate him either. So he couldn't be sedated. So that was. It was really, they tried everything, things which should just knock a horse out didn't seem to do anything for him. So, so that was that. We had a number of attempts to do MRIs, but eventually we found something that worked. So, yes, and then he had an operation to remove, which was able to remove 95% of that, but that meant for a layperson about a quarter of his brain had to go. It's a temporal lobe, which is a sort of a banana-shaped thing across here, was gone, and that's got some really sort of vital bits of equipment in. And he was 4, so parts of being a human and how a human functions have been housed in that area as well. So
which hemisphere was that, out of interest? What side of the brain, or was it across both hemispheres?
No, that's his left. That's on his left side.
It was his left side. Okay, we'll come on to that a bit later.
I was curious why you've asked.
Well, that's how I found you, actually, because you like to post by someone called Ian McGilchrist, who I've been deep diving on. So I was just curious. Anyway, we can come on to that later. So he had brain surgery to remove a brain tumor that took a quarter of his brain out at the age of 4. Wow. And yeah, what happened next?
So the quality of life started to get somewhat better. So at that point he was about 4, but he had a mental age of way less than that, still like a baby. So he was, doubly incontinent, no speech. The operation, he had an eye that turned out, and the seizures continued, not at the 500 a week, but 6 a month, which was, for anybody who's listening that also has, somebody that they care for with seizures, that I've been used to a regularity. I knew that, every 2 hours this is when it's roughly going to happen. Now then, there suddenly was this new experience of being anxious all the time. Is one going to happen now? Because I don't know. I can't predict this anymore. So it was a different scenario, and I wasn't really prepared for that. So it was agonising in a different way. But some quality of life was coming back, and then we were having. And then there would be some sort of assessment going through. But by that point, so I had learnt, the exchange breathing method, which is what the method to stop a seizure is called. And so I'd learnt that, so I could use that. I also had, towards the end of that last year, I found and done a fantastic course. I think that was after his operation, yes it was. But I'd found out about something called the Anti-Neuroinflammatory diet, which I then later really took a deep dive into and really instituted with him, and that did help us a lot as well. So,
and what's that? Do you mind just me? I'm very curious about diets and the link to diets and health and brain health. So is it again no sugar, gluten, dairy, that kind of thing, or was it protein heavy, fat heavy, meat, vegetable heavy? So
there are certain nutrients or certain food types which are which have a role like a drug. You swallow drugs, but so you can use food in a way that is medicine, and so certain foods actually are going to dampen down inflammation. Now you've got this amazing, your brain has got something called the blood-brain barrier around it, like a membrane, which it's almost like cling film. You shouldn't be able to put, we wrap cling film around things, you can't get things through. But it's got some very little gateways in it. But if you imagine these are two cells, they're very close together. You can't get very much through. It's called close junctions. So it's very fussy about what it lets in and out of that, and nothing should get in and out. But there are certain foods, and where their constituents can pass through that barrier, so you can get them into the brain, and then they have what's called this anti-neuroinflammatory effect. So a wonderful, really amazing man called Dr. Datis Karazian has done a lot of research into this, and now has translated that research into practical things that you can do. So he runs a fantastic course. So if anyone, this is for practitioners, but he also has a list of people who are trained in this. So if you're interested, you could go and look at somebody who's
I'll link to him in the show notes. And what are these foods that can penetrate the blood-brain barrier and nourish and or anti-inflame, reduce inflammation that's happening in the brain?
So we were told to eat a rainbow of colours. It's not far off that. So you do want to eat a range of plant-based foods, but not anything that's been processed, ultra processed. So so there's some sort of plant-based pretend bacon and things. Yes, it might be plant-based, but that's ultra processed. Okay. Not that. Real plants, real whole foods. So and a wide variety of them. So let's think of pulses, beans. You've got different types of rice. So not your highly polished white rice that's lacking in things. You want really dark black rice, red rice, things. And then sort of spices, herbs and spices, certain of these, so curcumin, which is turmeric, that comes from that. Yeah. Buckwheat flowers are high in flavonoids as well. That's I think it's something like a rhubarb. I think it's in the rhubarb family, but it's buckwheat is not a wheat. So it's these things, and so resveratrol, which is found in red wines, but also in Japanese knotweed, and green tea, but that does have caffeine. So, but you can have the constituents from that, and if you use it wisely. So, a whole variety of things to eat, and if you want to end up by getting 28 different plant-based foods a week. Now that sounds huge, doesn't it? If you're thinking of packets of vegetables, you don't want 28 packets of vegetables over a week. But if you think, oh, well, that includes all the spices, all the herbs, some garlic, and then even in breakfast. So I'd put in seeds. So for breakfast, you might have, my son loves pancakes. I love porridge, but you can have. So I'll go through my porridge. You can have just normal oats. Then you could have you could sprinkle in some coconut. You can use some seeds. So you use 3 or 4 varieties of that. So we're already up to like 6 or 7 things just with those. So then some fruit, some different berries. Oh gosh, right! You've easily hit your daily target within So yeah, to get 28 a week becomes achievable once you've just done all these things. So lots of that, good fats, and then
you did that course, and you found that was helping as well. You were down to 6 a month, but you weren't quite sure where. You'd had the surgery. You were having six, but you didn't know when they were. It was a horrible kind of uncertainty as to this weight, this kind of permanently being on edge.
Yeah, so I think it was a dual thing. So I used some of those. So I was using this diet, and then also I think because we were able to stop most of his seizures with the exchange breathing method, and then if they use it or lose it. So if the brain isn't using a pathway, it will lose it. So there is, I can't prove this, but there is thought that if you are stopping something happening, then the brain will forget how to do it. So there was a question, was that helping my son to forget having seizures by interrupting them so that they didn't continue? Not necessarily, but even just the fear that's associated with a seizure by the person that can exacerbate the seizure, making that go away. So yeah, there's various elements that all came into play, and then we did a course of hyperbaric oxygen therapy right after his surgery as well, which when we looked at his scar afterwards, it was beautiful. It's a very pristine scar, so there was lack of scarring, which is a great thing, because if you have scarring after surgery, then your chance of having seizures is greatly increased. So that was another beneficial thing. So we tried many things, and it's sort of like a gradual process.
So going forward to today, how is he? How is that recovery come along? Particularly having lost such a big part of your brain, I guess the inevitable question people have is, what does that mean in terms of one's development? What kind of life can they expect to have when they're older? Does it grow back? Just be curious to kind of see how he's doing really, and how you're doing at the moment. What's steady state life look like at the moment?
So I'll wind back to just a small bit, because after he...
Yeah, if there's anything important, go please tell me.
It really is. So after his operation, I asked the hospital what would be his sort of rehabilitation plan. I didn't use those words, but that's what I was asking. And they said, oh no, you just go home and fingers crossed, that was it. Which I really couldn't believe, because I was thinking, well, that doesn't seem right. That's not good enough. And so that's what got me started into thinking about neuroplasticity therapies. And then I came across something in Philadelphia, and then heard about what they were doing in Denmark, which is a very different program for rehabilitation. And yes, and just got inspired and started being able to go and train in different areas. And yeah, I did lots and lots of training, all for the sake of my son. And that's when everything just went up a notch. Everything became a lot more scientific, and I became a lot more fussy about what I was going to do, because I had spent a lot of time, money. That was very not great either, because you just do whatever you can to get your child better. because of this ripple effect. You want everyone, your whole family's life to be better. So that yes, you've got the time, the energy and the effort that you're putting in as well, and you want that to be as targeted and efficient as possible. So yes, I started learning about neuroplasticity therapies, and that was during his year after he had his operation. And then within that, you're measured a number of times in the year to see your progress. So his initial progress wasn't you think, oh, he's going to have an operation and he's going to get lots better.
Yeah.
But it didn't really happen in that way. So it was he was almost plateauing, and then I discovered these therapies, and it was just incredible. Within about 6 weeks, we went back to the psychologist for another assessment. So he had no language, and then I got him to speak words. Just individual words. I had flashcards, and so then he was reading as well. His learning had been so impaired by having seizures, and now it wasn't because I was showing him flashcards and he was reading the words. It was because of the other things, the foundational parts of his brain that we were really helping, that he was then able to do that. So we were doing some therapies with him, drug-free, non-invasive, nice, fun. That's really important. Therapies that you can do exercises with on yourself or with your loved one. So he was doing them, and I did them with him, and then that's what really started. And then as I got more aware of these and discovered more from around the world and went and trained, that's when we saw enormous leaps forward. And when we saw his psychologist for, I think probably the final appointment, he later related to me that he'd had to go and sit down. He just couldn't. He just was absolutely flabbergasted that the progress within just a few weeks. That my son was then, reading. He got out of his wheelchair and he walked up the stairs into the man's office, started reading. I showed him. I also had flashcards of dots, and each set of dots represented a volume. And so my son would just say, 6. 24, 1, so he was aware of volume with these dots as well. I can't think what else he did. Just talking was, it was just words, odd, definite words, but they were not conversation at that point. But then that progressed once I learnt something else. Like, oh wow, these are the foundations that a brain needs in order to have conversation. And then that was truly, oh gosh, if you've got a child that doesn't speak or struggles with language, then if they can say to you as a parent, just if they start talking at all, that's a blessing. And then there was a day, obviously, when he would say, I love you, and it's like, oh
wow.
Honestly, it was things like that, huge milestones, which everyone else takes for granted with a child when they're young, but then this was just huge. So, yeah. And
this is from neuroplastic. What are they called? Therapy.
Neuroplasticity therapies. Yeah.
Neuroplasticity therapies.
Yeah.
And so you were live, and you mentioned in the beginning these are basically what make your brain work better. But how is it? Plasticity is a molding sense with that word. Is it reshaping your brain? Is it remolding it? What's happening?
Yeah.
Are you creating new neurons? Are you strengthening the links between neurons? What does neuroplasticity actually mean?
Oh, you've just done a very good job of explaining.
Okay, fine.
So yes, it is. Plasticity comes from a sort of a Spanish understanding of things being plastic, moldable. So our wiring, David Eagleman has a really good term where he says our brain is live wired. It's biologically live. So say we were talking and you just told me suddenly, oh, my name's not Amul, and even though it says it on the screen, and you told me that your name, I don't know.
Or Susan. Yeah.
Susan, yeah, there we are. There we go. Secret desire that you. Right. I'm not reading anything into that.
No.
I think my phone's ringing. Just 2
Sorry.
seconds.
No, that's right.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So neuroplasticity therapies.
Yes. So we're live wired, and
yes.
so if there's if I tell you my name's Susan, then you'll react in a way that sort of jars you, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, Susan. So so I would then have a rewiring. So you've got so I thought your name was Amal, and then now you've told me, oh no. So I have to disconnect that, and then I have to reconnect some new information. And so I'm forming a new pathway. So word association is a really easy way to understand this. So if we say the colour yellow, and then can you think of 4 things associated with the colour yellow?
Right now, sand, ducks, bananas, sun.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So you've got, if you like, so this is a nice way to imagine it. So one neuron, which represents yellow, but then it goes but it's got an attachment and a link with ducks, sand. I can't remember the other 2 you said.
Bananas, I think, and sun.
Bananas, yeah. So then there you are. So then it's got these 4. So what you have is a dendrite coming out, a sort of a root, if you like, coming out of a neuron, and then it can have more subroots coming out, and it will join to these other things. But then equally, like if you changed your name and you said, oh no, that's not really my name, I can undo those. So we're live wired, we can grow links between these things, and then we can undo them. So if you use something, you strengthen that link. So it might be the strength of the signal that comes out that's actually strengthening it, because you're using it many times. Or it's very strong. If there's a very traumatic memory, you have more strength of those memories. So we have these strong pathways that are connected or that are there in the brain, and then other things which, if we don't need to use it, we won't remember it.
And I guess that applies to trauma as well. So if you have like a traumatic experience, whether it's an event or an injury or whatever, that will cement itself quite hard in your brain, and you'll associate the things with that trauma, and it's hard to undo that, I'm guessing, or ever, if ever at all possible, to undo it, and without neuroplasticity therapies. Is that right?
Yeah, so that would be, if that would more likely, there's different ways in which the trauma can affect the brain. If it was something that you were able to verbalise and talk about, and that your brain worked perfectly well up until that point, but you just had been, with something traumatic, we will go over and over. Typically, you'll go over and over and over it. You'll think about it again and again. You're wired for survival, so you don't want to relive that experience. So you're going to be thinking, if that ever happens again, this is what I'll do. What can I learn from this? So whilst you're sleeping and whilst you're awake, you'll be taking that memory in and out, because it would have been so traumatic, most likely for many people. So you're strengthening those memories. But for this is quite a high level, across here of being able to think about those memories and possibly attach emotions to them. So that's when some so talking therapies could help with that. But then also you've got other things like EMDR, which is helps to detach the emotions from the memories. So yes, there are things like that which can help. Trauma can also affect us in other ways. It can be an interrupter, particularly for children, so it can interrupt their development. So that works in a different way.
Right.
So it's...
Okay, so let's move away from trauma, back to kind of the therapies, neuroplasticity therapies. So I was looking at the various ones that are listed on your website, and it feels to me that a lot of them are kind of, and you'll no doubt correct me, but about your sensory perceptions, kind of re-engaging. You've got aromatherapy, so kind of re-engaging your ability, using smell, fascia, your skin, that kind of massage or touch, your kind of your touch, tactile perception, and auditory, your music therapy, whatever it might be, and that's why is that important? Why did I find that interesting? Our before we developed language, the only way we could understand the world as up the evolutionary tree was by using our sensory perceptions. That was the only link we had with the outside world to kind of try and map it. And then we developed language and symbols, and that was a completely, totally new way of like being able to understand the world. And we've gone so deep into we've ended up creating a whole new world that's an abstract representation that isn't really real. This sort of terrain or map which lives on the internet, lives on social media, lives, and it's almost like reconnecting ourselves back to the old way we used to perceive or understand the world, which is our sensory perceptions, not just our ability to abstract and linguistically understand what's going on around us. Is that a fair way to kind of map a lot of these therapies, that they're kind of getting us back to kind of putting our feet on the ground and feeling the earth, or whatever it might be? That is, it sounds a bit, I'm sure it's much more involved than that, but I'm making it seem a lot more kind of airy-fairy yoga-y, if that makes sense. But yeah, is that right?
So definitely not airy-fairy yoga-y.
Yeah.
But something in what you've noticed, yes, so you have your motor nerves which are output and action related, and then you've got your sensory nerves which are input and what am I noticing about the world. And so these all have to be stimulated and used in order for our brain to be functioning really well. So what also that you've noticed is that the modern world is encouraging us to just do sort of cerebral tasks, generally typing away on a laptop or speaking your thoughts that get translated into words, and that's the be all and end all. Well, no, being a human and having a well functioning brain demands a lot more than that. So these types of things where you were using scent, it's not a one size fits all, so you wouldn't use the same scent for everybody. For each person, somebody may be feeling very drowsy all the time. You might be using something that would perk them up, but equally, going back to hemispheres, you might be saying, I only want to use the left nostril for this. So you're working in a very targeted way, and you're deliberately stimulating certain areas of the brain. So there's no like in sort of psychology or general aromatherapy where you're like, oh well, 18 out of 20 people found this a lovely experience, so just use that. No, we want to know, is my patient one of those 2 out of 20 where this won't be? So you're cutting out that guesswork, and you're not using sort of generalized behavioral theories. You're assessing the brain. So you've got many regions of the brain. So typically we think of there are 52, but there's closer to 700 when you count all the sub-regions. And then this is left. And then those are divided into left and right. So then you're thinking, okay, which side of the brain do I want to be stimulated? What have I found during the assessment and of those areas, and then which area am I going to target first? And then with this individual in front of me, what are perhaps their interest areas, or may quite often less so. Well, yeah. So what are their interest areas? So can I make it relevant too? So, so for example, if you were wanting to use somebody's sense of balance and that they were, interested in horses, you might have a picture of a horse, and so something which that's a very basic example, but something which it's tailored to them in some way, that you're going to use what they're familiar with already, and which they perhaps enjoy, to then use that, integrate it with your therapy, so that it's motivational for them to continue.
Okay, and just stepping away from therapy specifically or therapy per se, how does one, let's say someone like me, how should I think about neuroplasticity in my day-to-day life if I want to, people may question whether I need therapy or not and argue strongly with me that I should, but, when I'm not having therapy, let's say, if I want to be a better person or concentrate better, learn new skills better, be better at my job, be a better parent, better husband, whatever it might be, how should I be thinking about neuroplasticity on a day-to-day basis? Are there habits? Is it meditation? What being in nature? What are some practical day-to-day things I can do or kind of not do to use the concept of neuroplasticity? And are there I guess a second question to that is, what are the limits to neuroplasticity? I assume I cannot make myself a Premier League footballer by doing, by changing my brain, remolding my brain. That's not going to happen, right? No matter how hard I try. So what is the scope of this? Sounds very powerful, but what are the limitations, and what could I be doing, today, after this conversation, tomorrow, for the rest of my life, to kind of use neuroplasticity to kind of be a better person?
So, so you want to be Susan, the Premier League football player, is that right? Is that
Yeah, exactly. So that's that. We can take that on offline, or maybe one-to-one therapy.
Okay.
But
but in general, so you're looking for, when you say becoming a better person, you're interested in because you are, you're achieving a lot in your life already, and you've got a lovely family, and you've got a good job, and you're even doing podcasts, so you've got and you meet amazing people, so there's lots of things going on. So you're thinking, what would those tweaks be that I could perhaps do?
I guess they don't feel like tweaks, but I mean, putting me on the couch maybe, like, if, let's say, 10, on the 10 occasions that my kids will do something annoying, or that, 8 out of the 10 times I will, be able to diffuse it or not react, or kind of, but there may be the couple of occasions where I'll be like, snap, or I'll kind of, that, or I'm working and I'm feeling a bit lazy, actually I'll let this piece of work go, or I won't quite do that thing as well as I could do, because I'll just get it done and ship it off, because what does it matter really? Actually, how do I, 8 times out of 10 I wouldn't do that, but there's a few times where actually, looking at my phone, I hate the amount of time I spend looking at my phone, or going to the internet, or whatever, there's so many things that, that don't feel like tweaks, that are actually quite fundamental, that I wish I could, I could, that are stopping me from maximizing my ability to contribute to the world, or be the most that I can be. And whether it's bad habits with technology, or it's not spending having those slippages in my personal relationships, which are fundamentally, I think, fine. I'm not saying this, but they could always be better. And not forgetting my sister's birthday or whatever. I don't know. Bad organisational skills, doing my tax return on time. These things don't seem. I guess they sound like tweaks to you, but I guess feel fun. When you're kind of a person where nothing's ever good enough, or you're kind of always, you could always be, doing better. Yeah, I don't know how to wrap that up, but I hope I've given you enough there to kind of to sort of. But what can you? I guess what I'm asking is, there's no quick fix, but what can neuroplasticity therapy, or an approach to understanding neuroplasticity on a day-to-day basis is? I'll give you a very simple practical example. I try to meditate every day, but it doesn't always happen, and all the times when it happens, I am just thinking about things and not achieving the thing that's set out to. Now, maybe that's the wrong thing for me to do, or maybe, how do I do the things I want to do better, the habits, and how do I not do the things I don't want to do? And I appreciate that's a big question, but it's from the lens of the way you see the world with your experiences.
So you're quite self-critical, and you've got this list of things that you'd like to be better in your life, and then you've given me an example of meditation where you have thoughts which come in and interrupt that, and you find you're thinking rather than meditating, able to easily block those out. Is that right?
Yeah, let's yeah. I mean, I could keep going on and on, but yeah, let's start there. And
Right. So, there are two halves to neuroplasticity therapy. So the first half is what we talked quite a lot about at the first part, where we talked about things which are good for general brain health. So you've got, the very first thing we need to be alive after we've born is to breathe. So your breathing is, and the way that you breathe, but also the quality of air that we are breathing as well is really important. But so that's a general health thing. Am I getting good quality of air where I am? But then how am I breathing? That's also important as well. And you can have an assessment for that, and then that's something that can help then fuel your brain better, because we do need the right ratio of oxygen and carbon dioxide within our system in order to help our brain to be nice and healthy. And then diet. So how is our diet? So we've talked something about that. General lifestyle, and we've talked about aspects of how even parenting in the modern age, of people just typing or doing in that, not using all their senses each day. So yes, there's certain things that we can certainly do to put our brain in a much better starting place, healthier. So we're giving all the health things, but now are we stimulating it enough? So for longevity, it does need stimulation. So we've got all these regions. So let's just go for the bigger ones. There's 52 of those, which is 104 altogether, 52 on each side. So then you are thinking, what do I need to stimulate each of those? So we typically think of the big ones when people say, "Oh, let's do some brain training apps," but that's really high up. That's these ones here. But the ones lower down are actually what this is resting on. When you're doing your meditation, you're having these thoughts that come through, and they are to do with if you think of this as like a barrier, and to filter out other stimulation, whether that's from external or internal with thoughts. So if there's a barrier, and then your filtering system is like this, it's letting stuff through, and you want it to be like this, not let through. So why isn't your filtering system working well? And so that rests on other parts of your brain being able to work well. And why aren't they? Is there something about them that's not as efficient or effective as it could be? And so why are they weak? Let's work on those, and then you should then see this domino effect of oh gosh, it's much easier now, I should be able to do that. But I couldn't. The brain is more unique than a fingerprint. Far, billions of pieces of neurons and all the connections between them. And if you've learnt lots and lots, then you've got even more connections, which is great. But and have you learnt, are there many connections in all regions? Have you learnt lots? Is the sort of social side of your brain working really well? Does that get enough stimulation? Do you have enough conversation every day, or are you just watching YouTube videos all day? Yes, you're learning things. Or are you reading, or are you listening to podcasts? That's input. Do you get a chance every day to practice lots of output? Maybe not. Or movement, dance, rhythm, creating music. When we go back to Ian Gilchrist, creativity is not something that's encouraged in our society. We are very everything manufactured in a very uniform way. We've probably got very similar looking laptops. We don't do very much creatively. Making things in a personalising thing. Our houses probably look quite personalised, but there's many items.
They don't probably. And if you walk, the suburbanisation of most people, you never in nature see such kind of neat 2D shapes, these sort of Euclidean, triangles and squares that, you walk down any given street and these shapes are just all the same, these boxes and triangles just sat on top of them and we've lost that, our eyes have lost that kind of
Cars.
diversity of perception. Yeah.
Cars are just classic. We spend so much time in them, and yet young people, dangle things and put, wrap their steering wheels in pink fluffy things. But beyond that, we all behave in quite a uniform way, and just it's like amazing that our cars are just so precious, and yet we do very little to be creative with them and decorate them in any way. So
just going back to kind of breath work sounds like something that, obviously getting better quality air where possible, if possible, as much as you can, but practicing breathing exercises in some way on a daily basis could help, get your brain in a better place to be able to concentrate, focus, not react to certain situations that you don't want to react to, or whatever it might be, or be more creative and responsive. Is that right?
So yes and no. So yes, your breathing can have an effect on you, but you want, in an ideal world, you would want that breathing to be as natural, and so that breathing rhythm and pattern and how you breathe needs to be part of you, rather than something you think, oh, I can manage this situation if I do X, which can help, but then that means that you're managing it rather than changing it permanently. So if it's going to, it will very likely help, because we can trick the brain. So the brain has some output, and then there are different nerves which then sense that output and then register that back to the brain again. So
there's people who are, you've got to kind of change your steady state way of breathing, or kind of how you, I'm assuming longer, deeper breaths are better than constantly rapid, shallow ones. Is that fair?
So what's your understanding of deeper as a breath?
Oh, so so shallow breathing is when you're, it's more frequent, and it's less, the length of the inhale and exhale is shorter than a deeper breath, where you're kind of, how they say in kind of yoga or whatever, you take the breath into your stomach rather than keep it in your, try and bring it all the way down and then bring it all, exhale for as long as you can. But having a breathing pattern, steady state, when you're not thinking about it, that's deeper or that lasts longer in the inhale and exhale, is better than a shorter one, for example. Developing that is an example.
Yeah, so I only ask because a lot of people think it means a big breath. So when it's deeper, it's you're using your diaphragm, you're at the bottom of your ribs there. That's what you want to do, and you don't want to take a big breath. Big is really not physiologically good for the body at all. But yes, using lower down portions of your anatomy to create that breath, and making it long but not big, it can be a way to help remain calm in stressful situations. And then there are various nerves which are feeding back to the brain. This is how my lungs are moving, and the surrounding anatomy is moving. All must be in a calm state, because that's what I'm registering. But you've tricked your brain. That's a management tool, because you're deliberately positioning things as part of your anatomy in that way, and making them move in a very slow, elongated way. So, but if you can make that happen naturally, so if somebody can be more, so if you can do things to encourage that more, then that, So,
And do you encourage? And I'll just caveat this now, because I'm sure you're not claiming to be some sort of guru or medical expert. This is all from the learnings you've had and the experience you've had and the work you do. So I know, I'm just making sure that people aren't getting you thinking that you're making claims you're not. But we live in an age of distraction, as you've mentioned ultra processed foods, for example, things that we like are being, amplified to the point where they are very easy to are very hard to say no to, whether it's food or it's, digital distraction, let's say. Is that's going to have an impact on your brain in a negative way, I'm guessing. Are neuroplasticity therapies a way to counteract that, or be better at saying no to them, or helping you cope with them, or do they take you away from I mentioned, I look at my phone too much, for example, at certain points of the day, and I have to or flicking to the internet when you should be working, or whatever it might be. Concentration, focus gets harder and harder. I've seen that you've linked to Andrew Huberman on your website as a podcast that you like. There's a lot of talk about dopamine these days, and that being the currency that's driving everything. And so how do you think about dopamine distraction, and then your side of the equation with neuroplasticity to kind of counteract that or address that?
So we as a species have learnt a lot about the things which people will be addicted to, and then we've allied that with earning money. So people want to, there's a whole other philosophical debate or something to talk about, which is the drivers of society, but people want to take advantage, and that's what's not nice. People want you to stay on that screen and to scroll and to do things. So, there's a fantastic book that's just come out, The Digital Delusion, by Jared Cooney Hovarth, and he actually gave some evidence to, I think, in America, somewhere like the Congress, even though he lives in Australia, he's the world expert anyway. So.
I think I saw the clip, and I think there's obviously the work of Jonathan Haidt as well about the anxious generation and the role of, the flip side of that is actually the community that helped you was very, if we didn't have Facebook and we didn't have those online communities, you would have been, so there's obviously a good side to all these things. We've got to give the devil its due, and there are positives to having nice food, which maybe is not that good for you, but in a social setting where you can kind of bond over it. And there's, but there's the kind of ultra availability and the distraction that can have if you take it too far.
So because we are susceptible to these things, I think there's, it's maybe a bit of critical thinking is needed in terms of making yourself aware that you are being, you are the generator of this entertainment. If people didn't input into it, then it wouldn't be very entertaining. If you were the only member of Facebook, it would be quite boring. It'd be quite maybe a useful record for you to read to your grandchildren one day, but it'd be very boring.
Yeah.
So we're all contributing towards this. This isn't an answer from neuroplasticity therapies really, but I think it's two-pronged, so it's useful to think of this. So there's some side of us which needs to, for people who are otherwise very able and capable and should be progressing well through society, to know that we're being hijacked by this technology, that if we stick with thinking about our phones and how far gone our society is, and you only need to go on a train or a bus and you see everyone addicted to them. They're literally addicted to these screens. It's interesting that we scroll up as well, so our eyes are moving up. Oh well, I'm not going to fall asleep, because I'm constantly opening it. So we're doing things have come out of neuroscience and psychology, studying of behaviours. And then these have been taken advantage of. So I think if people can educate themselves around this, and Jared's book is a great place to start, then you have this awareness. And then there's another chap, what's his name? Daniel Priestley. I don't know if you've heard of him, the business sort of guru. So his father, Andrew Priestley, I heard him speak about 13 months ago, and I thought it was just really a light bulb moment. So he explained, he said, your phone, he said it was to do with business and business development, and motivating people just to get on with it. Come on, just get on with it. And this is, so he said, but your phone will, how many hours, so you, right, look on your phone, I mean, you can do this now if you want, but you can look on your phone and see how many hours you've spent, on average, what's your weekly amount. And anyone listening, I encourage you to have a look at this now and see what your screen time is. You can go into settings on most phones and look up screen time and see how many hours that is, our daily average. So we all have a look, and it's like, what? It's shocking, how much of your percentage of every day is on that. Then he explained this, look, you are the entertainers, you're creating this. And he said, for every one of you, there are about 100,000 developers, software people, marketing, sales, all these companies, the people that work in these companies, they are all there. They want you to stay staring at this piece of metal and plastic. So they'll do everything they can. They've learned all the tricks from psychology, neuroscience. This is how to keep people on there and on there and on there. And so he said, would you do battle with 100,000 people? No, you just wouldn't. Physically, you wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to win.
Yeah.
So you're
so
not.
It's easier just to put it away. Basically.
Just don't engage. Just don't engage. Take all the apps off your phone. Well, I'd never thought of it like that before, and I did take all of the apps off my phone, and that was apart from LinkedIn. I left LinkedIn on, but then I had an epiphany later on, and then I took that off as well, and now I do the 8 till 8. So 8 at night, my phone is just it won't activate any of those things. It will take a phone call, but that's it. I switch off everything else.
It's a phone. It's just a phone. It's kind of like you're in the old sense. Yeah.
Honestly, the 8 till 8 challenge is. I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's a lifestyle now for me. You get your quality of sleep, the dreams you have, amazing. Your ability to think the next day, so much better. Your productivity way up. 8 till 8. I mean,
okay.
If you can just do that one night, you'll feel, that horrible feeling of deleting apps. So if I need to go, and I do look at apps, some social media things, but I go on my computer. It's a huge hassle. So I don't, it's not fine.
It's the friction. It's the friction that's important. Introducing a kind of to give you that check on yourself to kind of go, okay. It's like locking the whiskey bottle in the top right cupboard. By the time you've kind of got the ladder out, got the right key out, put the right combination in, you may have a better chance of stopping yourself from going, oh, maybe I'll just leave it in there. Versus it being on the kitchen counter or whatever it might be. Not that I don't have that set up at home. I don't, but just as metaphorically speaking. So look, I'm conscious of time, and there's 3 or 4 things I wanted to talk to you about, and I realise you need to head off soon.
Well, let's I'd quickly say on neuroplasticities how can you benefit. You would need the equivalent of an MOT, which is like a car test, an annual car test on your brain. If you really wanted to get into this, and then somebody would be able to assess you, and then assess all those regions and say, okay, this is where I think you should start, and based on your lifestyle, here's some things which would stimulate that area of your brain. Or more rarely you say, I don't want that area to be stimulated, let's do some other things to stop that being. But generally you're looking at strengthening an area or areas of the brain, and those are in the foundations, which are the things that modern life doesn't tend to encourage us to do, but that can strengthen those, and then your ability to meditate and so on will be better. So
I'll be sorting out an MOT ASAP. That sounds like a great idea.
I can recommend someone that's near you. I don't know where you live, but we'll figure that bit out.
So that takes us neatly onto Neuro. Can you tell us about Neuro Frontiers? When did you set it up? What does it do? What are you trying to achieve? What would you like people to take away from that? So let's start with Neuro Frontiers, and then
that's been such a blessing. So I felt that once I'd done years of work with my son, so he wasn't in school for great periods of time, or we did a dual placement where he was at home and in school, because he just needed all these treatments to be done, and it wasn't so easy. Some of them were only available abroad, so I went off, learnt them, and came back and instituted them with him. And sometimes it was a challenge, but as I learnt. This was a huge lesson to make it fun, and then I enjoyed it, he enjoyed it, and we got on with it, and that was you do need to make it fun, and that some of that means you need support. But anyway, so I didn't want to be a therapist forever. I wanted to be his mum, and to get on with it with my own life. So then I was really lucky in being able to get the people I was working with to write something, and then it got put into what's called an EHCP, a document which sets out what a child needs to experience, mainly in a school setting. So then his teachers were suddenly empowered with this as well, and then they could see the progress. Oh gosh, wow! As his ability to balance gets better, he seems to be more emotionally balanced. So, and that's not wacky. There is if your brain's more organised, you're not going to be so anxious, so you can be more, emotionally balanced. So then they could join up the dots and see that these things were happening, and so I thought, right, that was a transition, and then I realised, gosh, I have been given this gift and a huge opportunity. I've got a wealth of knowledge. I need to do something with this, and so I started. So that's when Neuro Frontiers really started, and then I was able to work one-to-one with people.
Which year was that? Which year was that?
2019, around 2019. And then I have more recently evolved that, because I've worked with many people now, and have great faith in neuroplasticity therapies, and the power and the hope and the level of, oh gosh, yeah, this is it, and that they bring. And so I now started teaching. So that's it's in its infancy, if you like, but I've done like last autumn did a great course on the neurophysiology of breathing, but it was called breath, and it still is, you can still get it. It's called breath brain behavior. So you're looking at the relationship between the breath and the brain, and then the final output of behavior, and figuring out what you can do with breathing, how you can make that better in order to then actually have that quality of life thing at the end. So
would that help people with anxiety, depression, ADHD, concentration problems? I mean, what kind of, or is that just for everyone? People who've been through, who would that be targeted at?
Yeah, so again, some of those labels that you've just mentioned are from sort of psychology, where again, it's similar to epilepsy. They're labeling that final outward behaviour, and that is probably a root cause. So we can't say, definitively, yes, that will always happen, that will always help depression. So that's why in neuroplasticity therapies you say, don't treat the patient, not the diagnosis. So you treat everyone. You'd have this MOT on them, assessment of all their brain areas, and figure out something personal for them. It's much more scientific. You can't guarantee, but yes, definitely. So for people who are experiencing ADHD-like symptoms, it's breathing, understanding where over 70% of them are likely to benefit from some sort of breathing pattern, sort of regulation and improvements. Then it is useful, but again, you don't, because there's another nearly 30% where it's not going to be of any use. If you've got ADHD-like symptoms, this might not be your what you called your silver bullet. So, but rather than taking guesswork, using lots of guesswork, if you can take a more scientific approach, you can be then saying, this is your best starting point, and that's his best starting point. Even if 10 people in a room came with ADHD, they wouldn't get the same program.
Fantastic. Well, we'll link to that, and Would love to go deeper in that at some point. Anything else you're up to at the moment that you want to tell people about, which within this sphere of the brain and making the world a bit of a better place through being able to kind of mold our brains into a better shape?
Well, we can talk about Ian if you like, and his inspiring work,
Yeah.
and thinking about going back to being more creative, and thinking of areas of our brain which we don't use, and if we don't use them, they're going to, if you like, go stale, or there'll be less connections in them, and connections bulk out areas of the brain. So healthy brains are nice, got lots of ridges and curves, and they're like waves all over them. So, but if you're not using an area of the brain, it will just become almost flatter and flatter. So we need to be thinking about, do I smell things on a regular basis? Can I distinguish between, a tangerine and an orange, for example, which is, that's, if you close your eyes, could you do that? And once so that you can stimulate your brain with lots of things. When was the last time I danced? When was the last, made movements? So that's a creative thing from ourselves. Painted, talked about something. We were talking about things now, so that's it is a creative skill in itself. There's lots of things we can do that aren't necessarily cerebral. They're more, require movement and stimulation and listening and output.
Yeah, and the problem is, from a very young age, if you get put in a box and say, well, that's not for you. I mean, James Dyson, I don't know if you've ever read his biography, it's quite interesting. He kind of very glib puts it, talks about the education system. Is like, well, if you got glasses, you do maths. If you're a bit thick, you do PE. If you like drawing, then off you go. Like, we just, from a young, I mean, I'm literally quoting what he said, like in the book. The way that, society, the education establishment, whatever it is, just from a very early age said, well, dance isn't for you, drawing isn't for you, maths isn't for you, you're not a mathsy person, whatever, and so you then, for the rest of your life, are deprived of something which maybe at that moment when you were 7 or 11 you weren't ready for, but at 37 probably you could do doing a bit of learning an instrument, or taking up running, or whatever it could be, and it's just unshackling people from those chains that they've been put into from an early age, either by their parents or society, or teachers that are overworked and overpressured to kind of ram you through a standardized curriculum, and so
there is that side of it. So say you wanted to do dancing, but you were labelled uncoordinated as a child, you might well find that you're still uncoordinated as an adult. So, but why is that? So, there are, if you like, sort of pulses through the brain, sort of, they happen in networks. Is there anything you can do to help your brain to then be more coordinated, and then you're physically more coordinated, and vice versa, physically more coordinated, the brain is more coordinated. So yes, you're trying to, if you are struggling and you think, I'd love to dance but I'm feeling uncoordinated, there are things that you could probably do to help that coordination before you hit a dance floor. Or a bit of both.
And is it in the struggle where the kind of magic happens? You start a new skill, and obviously, the point of it being a skill is that it's hard, and it's not meant to be easy, and it's got to take repeat practice and repetitions and reps, and that's where the magic. That's the point, right? Rather than just thinking, I've tried this thing, it didn't work, I'm no good at it, I'm going to stop.
Ish. So. Let's imagine that you thinking about. So I'm just going to pause for a minute. Don't worry about time. It's my father I need to see, but he can wait half an hour. That's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah.
We can relax. So I say ish because Gosh, I've lost my train of thought now. So sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's okay. I asked a lot of people when they try and learn a new skill, particularly when they're older. There's that thing of like plasticity dries out once you're past a certain age. You actually, when you're young, you can absorb. You know, your ability to learn is much easier apparently if you can concentrate on something because your brain is much more
Oh,
plastic, moldable.
no.
And then when you're older, forget it. Forget trying to learn an instrument or a language or a skill because you're just set. You're done. That's it.
Oh,
Till,
right. So no.
and don't teach an old dog new tricks.
So I say ish because repetition isn't always the answer. Yes, if you can get those connections going first, so it's like a thread, and then you make it like a piece of string, and now it's like a big thick piece of rope, and yes, you're going to become more expert at that skill. But if you're struggling to even get the first bit of thread to even match up, gosh, that's so hard, then it's like children who struggle with handwriting. So if it's just doing more and more and more handwriting you might eventually get some results, but it's the hardest bloody possible path that you could put that poor child through, and they're feeling like they're failing all the time. So that's when neuroplasticity therapies are so useful, because you can say, right, what are the building blocks that go towards a child being able to do neat, flowing, smooth handwriting, easily legible. And there are different building blocks, and they have nothing to do. Many of them have nothing to do with the hands. so you need to be thinking, right, how does the brain organise itself to that point that enables this beautiful handwriting to appear? Okay, so I need to go back through those developmental building blocks and then work with those, get those better, and then bam, that child can write pretty fluently the first time, just like, right, so now they've got that thread, now they can build on it to make better handwriting. If you're struggling right from the first point, no.
Yeah.
So doing something, that's why I said ish, so doing something first time, and so doing more and more and more something is really not always the answer. And then also, if you are thinking about people getting old and struggling with, no, not necessarily. So when people get old, they don't need. You can still learn something. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry. So when someone gets old, they can still learn something. Michael Merzenich, he's the father of neuroplasticity. He said the brain is never finished. So your brain, you can learn a new language, a few words at least, even on your last day on Earth, because your brain is never finished. It can always grow a new connection, that's what we should be wanting, to grow new connections, but not in just one area. Oh, I'm really good at crosswords, yes, but now let's see if you can balance on one leg. So we need to, or can you tell the difference between these two roses? We need. We need a variety of things to stimulate. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that growing new connections is in itself a skill, is something that you need to keep up to be able to therefore grow new connections? So the reason why older people, or it's perceived that older people struggle to learn new skills, is because they haven't learned any skills for ages. So they've forgotten how to create new connections because they haven't kept it up. So then you all of a sudden try and do it when you're 65, and you haven't done that, you haven't kept that up, that ability to learn new things, which is why, whereas if you'd been doing it from a young age, we leave school and you're kind of writing poetry and you're doing sport and you're learning science, and then you get a job and then you do the same thing every day for 40 years. You kind of lost that keeping it up, doing a martial art, doing an instrument, doing, getting out into nature, whatever, learning to build things and use your hands. That's why neuroplasticity diminishes when you're older, because you haven't been learning to learn or keeping up the skill of learning.
I think, because you said about growing new connections, but we need to grow healthy new connections, because each time you're on, social media, you're growing some connections there, but they're not necessarily where you want to be strengthening a
Right.
pathway or growing connections. So let's think about growing healthy new connections, and then older people, why do they struggle with learning things? So it's twofold. So roughly every 7 years, we're going through new phases of life, hormones change and so on. And so, there's times when learning is so much easier, and those are in I think is in sort of your early to mid 20s that learning is, and that's a great time that you're going to be able to take on lots of information and work well with that. But you still, our skills and abilities continue to grow beyond that point. So, but there comes a time when what the brain absolutely loves is efficiency. So if it's thinking, it prunes off connections which it doesn't need if it thinks that I haven't used that. So if did you take A levels?
I did, yeah.
But if I asked you to take your A levels tomorrow and get really good grades in them, or the similar that you got before, would you be able to do that?
We know, absolutely no way, yeah.
No. So you've pruned off all that knowledge because it's not relevant. You haven't needed it in your lifetime. So the brain says, brilliant. I'll not maintain that connection. And then so older people want to feel safe as well, because your body's becoming frailer. So I'll just do the same thing as I've done every day, because I've got into this groove now, and I know all of these things are familiar and safe. And if the electricity failed, I could still get up the stairs in the dark and find my bed. I know where everything is. So change becomes resisted into older age. So we will stick with those familiar patterns, but we, for the health of our brain, to keep it, getting new connections, we do need to challenge ourselves. Or what would be wonderful is to create a culture where it would be normal to do things which took us out of our comfort zones. And this is where Dan Bruckner's work of blue zones around the world is useful, looking at things which help people to remain healthy into older age. Or even studies of nuns. Nuns tend to live to a ripe old age, and they also appear to have, there's studies that show they appear to have brains which look like they should have dementia, and yet they have no symptoms of dementia. So
I'm really glad you mentioned nuns, because that's taking me on to my next.
Oh no!
I was going.
Susan, the footballing nun.
Yes, Susan's. She'll be doing keepy uppies in her habit, and
Wow.
scoring bicycle kicks.
You're going to be on a lot of
Arsenal.
podcasts.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about meaning. I feel a lot of, again, what I'm questioning internally is this sort of, let's take something like ADHD, or the lack of ability to focus on something. Is it because it doesn't matter? Some society said you should be able to do this, but this exam or whatever, wrote down this piece of homework, but it just doesn't matter to you. You don't attach any meaning to it. My A levels that you brought up, that knowledge versus the ability to ride a bike, which I also learned, at a young age. One has stuck with me, the other, is not that. It's short-term memory. Maybe taking your example, you've driven yourself to achieve a lot of what you've achieved, and done all the good for the world that you have, because you had this meaning that came from your son's illness, and that meaning drove you, and gave you the power to kind of do what you wouldn't have done had that not happened. Maybe not, I don't know. People who are religious have that meaning in their life to kind of, do things, live in a certain way, have something that they can anchor themselves to or hook themselves onto, that gives them a framework to live off. Whereas a lot of the issues with society or the world is this lack of anything to attach yourself to, going on nice holidays, earning money, getting lots of likes or being famous. These are all kind of, we've encouraged, you know, side effects to be the actual, or like symptoms or knock-on effects to be the goal, rather than the things that, you know, if you want lots of likes, do, you know, create interesting things or do good things, and maybe a knock-on effect of that is you might make a bit of money and you might, you know, build a bit of a following. But it shouldn't be the end goal in itself to kind of have a nice house. Having a nice house is a function of creating something the world wants and then being paid for it. To kind of, and so what we're living in is a crisis of meaning, and if, you know, the meaning drives you to work harder or to concentrate or to, you know, look past your fears, your anxieties, or your, you know, to kind of get the piece of work done, or to not worry about looking silly or kind of being embarrassed because this thing matters to you more than those things that affect people. What do you think? How do you think about that? What do you think of that? Is that an interesting way of looking at it?
Yes, it is. You know, again, we go back to the blue zones, and so meaning and having a sense of purpose is really important. You also mentioned religion, so having some sort of faith that you're on that purpose is, you know, if you like, your pathway, feels allied to that as well. So these are things which, you know, seem to be part of a good, healthy lifestyle. And so, yeah, I think, you know, I do have, you know, so a faith in something. I wouldn't hang my coat on any particular hook for a faith, but I definitely think that there's something out there, and I do feel that this sense of being on a pathway, not of my choosing, but as long as it's going smoothly, then I'm on the right pathway somehow.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm getting a great sense of joy and happiness out of it, and then reflecting that back on society as well. You know, we in the UK, we are not encouraged so much to do our own thing at school. The conversations in the careers department come and give you some chats from about 15. You start thinking about your career, and then who are you going to work for? We don't have this mentality of setting things up, being creative, setting something up yourself. What do you know? Do we have, or if we do amongst young people, it's very narrow. As you say, how can I become an influencer? How can I become famous on YouTube? You know, it's sort of a, you know. And another thing I notice is that we celebrate the BAFTAs, the Oscars, the Grammys. Why don't we think about? Why don't we have a fantastic program or anything really on Nobel Prize winners or people who've won MBEs and OBEs? I mean, there are some amazing people who are not celebrities that have done something world-changing that should be used to inspire, you know, anyone of any age, and especially young children. So they're, you know, and these are the jobs that matter and are changing society, and that these people have contributed. You know, contributing is another thing. You know, we're all encouraged to act as individuals in a competition. And are you going to be better than your neighbour? Not love thy neighbour anymore, not contribute, no, better than your neighbour. What car is on your driveway? Look at your neighbour's car, yours should be better. It's just a crazy world, and we're motivated, you know, or we're taught to be motivated by money, but what, you know, sense of purpose and feeling like you're contributing in the world is much, you know, as you get older, most people realise that that's you know, that's what they want on their gravestone, not the number of, you know, how many numbers did I have in my bank account. It's, you know, it's other people, or not necessarily people. It's as much nature. Lots of things keep, you know, are important to us, and I think. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've got a book right beside me just because we were on this topic, and I'm reading it at the minute, and a paragraph stood out, and I can read it to you if you've got 2 minutes.
Please, go for it. What's the book you're about to read?
Autobiography of a Yogi. Have you read that?
I've heard of it. Who's it by?
It's by himself, Paramahansa Yogananda.
Yeah, I know I've read it.
It's such a good book. I mean, and it's a lovely audio book as well. So I'm reading the both. I've got audio and the book because, um, oh gosh, it's a man who's a famous actor, but he's got a lovely voice. So anyway, for all ladies out there, it's a great, it's a lovely listen as well. He's relating a conversation in this bit, and he says, "Sir," I commented, "I have been thinking of the leading scientific men of the West, greater by far in intelligence than most people congregated here, living in distant Europe and America, professing different creeds and ignorant of the real values of such melas as the present one. They are the men who could benefit greatly by meetings with India's masters, but although high in intellectual attainments, many Westerners are wedded to rank materialism. Others, famous in science and philosophy, do not recognise the essential unity in religion. Their creeds serve as insurmountable barriers that threaten to separate them from us forever." It just feels relevant because it's this materialism and this being an individual, and we need to sort of shatter some of these illusions, and we've just been talking about the drivers and challenges and how people can get a sense of purpose from, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, a sense of purpose when you have a great enough challenge. And very sadly, I think, that the climate change is coming upon us, and then that will... there are some very astute people already, Ian McGilchrist is among them, thinking about, gosh, a huge challenge is coming to us, and then that we need to connect and join together in order to tackle this and stop. We just need a wake-up call, and then eventually nature is going to give us that big wake-up call, which will then be a challenge for us all. And then how can we then, with a collective intelligence, work together to try and solve this problem? And it will be a problem by then, and the reality of the problem, and we are starting to experience it now, whereas before we've been talking about it. Even when I was at school, probably when you were at school, climate change was a thing, and deforestation and desertification, but now the big results of this, it's not really a result, that sounds too, but the devastation of this is happening.
Yeah.
So
No, this, I guess it can boil down, I mean, the left hemisphere dominance of the way we think, which is on metrics and utilitarianism and, things that can be measured. I've got a book here, as I reckon it's called the Tyranny of Metrics, which is quite interesting, and how we kind of over-focus on the things that can be counted rather than the things that count, to kind of paraphrase Einstein. And I guess likes on Instagram or cash in the bank, or the square footage of your house, the number of people you slept with, all these types of things probably are easier ways to kind of map your world versus kind of genuine meaning. And so how do you reinstill some meaning? And maybe it's something that brings people together and jolts them out. It could be a war. We thought it might be a pandemic. That didn't happen, but yeah, maybe it's the environment. Who knows? But just, I guess, there is a yearning for meaning out there, and it sort of comes up in the data now. Indeed, like people are going back to churches again, looking at young, especially young people, because they're looking for something that isn't just having a good career, earning lots of money, and going on nice holidays.
That's true. Yeah, I think I loved your phrase. Not things that that can be counted, but rather the things that count. That's so. It's really important.
So, as you know, I like to try and wrap these conversations up with a question I ask every. Maybe you've alluded to it just now, but I like to invite all guests to do a kind of prediction over 10 years of something they think is going to happen, or something they'd like to happen, or both. And I quite like 10 years as a number because it's far enough away for it to be something big and meaningful, but it's not so far away that it's sort of, the prediction kind of, is meaningless. And it could be, I can, hopefully talk to you in 2 or 3 years' time, and we can see how the prediction's coming along, and because you'll be a third of the way through. And so if you've got anything that you think, positive or negative, I'd love to know your thoughts from the lens of the world that you see.
So this is, I feel, oh gosh, a sense of pain, to be honest, thinking about 10 years hence, which is, I want to, you want to end this on a nice, lively, upbeat note, but I can ally that with some sense of hope. And so, yes, working in neuroscience, I can appreciate that the way we treat the planet has a direct bearing on our nervous systems. So, if we are moving, doing and creating, planting flowers, even, thinking of like neurophysiology of breathing. Now, for the first time last year, the amount of oxygen started going down. We were having too much carbon dioxide producing it, but then the trees were plant lives mopping that up. But now it's a very small amount, but it's still a start that we are using up more oxygen than we are able to then produce on the planet. Now that's out of balance, very out of balance. So I feel, gosh, we're in 10 years' time. I think we'll be in a very painful place, and we'll be faced with many dilemmas. If people are retreating away from places which can no longer grow food, and then they arrive to places when their arrival will mark a vast overpopulation. So what do? Do we say, we'll be kind to nature because this is biodiversity can only occur when there's not that many humans? Or do we say, come on in, we'll just muddle through together, in which should be compassionate in one way but not compassionate towards nature? So lots of moral dilemmas, I think, will emerge over the coming years. But my great hope is that we will have some mechanism for helping people en masse to approach this with some togetherness, and that people will be able to remain calm through this. And there's a lovely course I'm about to start actually in March. It's called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, and it's a course that anybody could do, and that's done by Plum Village down in the south of France, but it's an online course. I'm very much looking forward to that. They had 1,000 people did it last year, and everybody just raved about it. So I'm wanting to that starts in a few days' time. And so I think that ability to remain calm is a very good thing, and that's good for our nervous systems too, and the whole new system of being. So all these systems that we've got at the minute of how we get about, and that we can just get on an aeroplane and travel as many times as we want in a year. Every decision has to be, is this good for the environment? Is this good for nature? Is this good for our planet? Then our decisions will be very different, and we might live in a very different way. It's a shame that the wake-up call will have had to have been so big in order to get us to that point, but that's the only thing that will represent the continuation of humanity in decades to come, which is a tragedy for our children, but something will have to change, and ideally it will be the systems. And then we can live the types of lives which Ian McGilchrist is talking about, because with a life that isn't so high-pressured and individualistic, where everything is measured by numbers and how many likes, etc. have you got, or how much money's in your bank and how many cars are on your driveway, and then if we're living a much more simple life, and we'll be much more choosy about this, we'll be... there is great opportunity for happiness. The way we treat the planet has a direct relevance to our nervous system. So if we're treating the planet better, then we should naturally be calmer and happier. So there's great hope for some joy and are much less stressed. Imagine having a life where it's almost like being on holiday every day. You don't have to be, like we would call it, the rat race. And so we would be not in a race and not like rats. We would be, I don't know what would be the opposite to that, but a joyous life in some way. And so I have, I've set up a website actually. It's called thundays.global, and it represents some hope for the future, and it's for experimenting with this lifestyle just one day a week on a Sunday, and I'm hoping to launch it in the spring around April, which is when Earth Day is. So just experimenting with this life where we don't take part in things which are harmful to the planet, and we only embrace those things which are good for us, our family, our friends, our local community. You might go and do something. So you're putting nature first, but at the same time you're putting yourself first. You're really looking after you, and you're feeling good about this. I can share that link with you. Yeah.
No, please do. And I guess before we sign off, how is your son doing now? What's the kind of where are we now after? We kind of finished that. We didn't quite finish that journey early on. We moved on to your work and neuroplasticity, but
yes.
But it'd be good to know. People will be dying to know kind of how he's doing today. What's life look like at the moment for you and him and the family?
He is mostly quite a joy to be around, because he's 16. He's incredible. He's got some amazing talents and interests. So it's probably through him I've spent more time in nature than ever. He absolutely loves nature, and he's not followed a conventional curriculum at all. He's just followed his own interests. He loves trees. He can identify trees by their bark, their buds, their seeds. He can even, if he shuts his eyes, he can tell you that what a tree is by the rustle of its leaves. So he's incredible in that way. He also has a photographic memory. That's to do with left and right hemispheres and what's become dominant. And so he can take a picture of a tree in his head, and then he draws. It's art. He'll do sculptures and drawings of trees so accurately, and then I'll say, well, it looks like a willow tree, but that could be any willow tree. No. And so he takes me to the spot and makes the camera, no, just there. Oh, that's it, take that picture, back with the picture. Bloody hell, yeah, that's it, that's exactly it. And he's just, and then a branch might fall off a tree, and he'll say, oh, there's a branch missing up there, just there. I'm like, it just looks like a tree to me. How does he know?
Oh my God. Yeah.
I know he's really amazing, and he's good fun. He just he will not be perfect. I mean, but I enjoy being with him, as he is. And there's certain things which will remain a challenge, and I'll be a forever parent. But there are, there's enough of life which is joyful, and I learn things through him, things that stopping to notice things that I would never have noticed otherwise, and from intimate details of things, mainly outdoors, because he loves being outdoors, and to grander things that also he notices. If you ever seen Police Academy, the film, when there's I can't remember the character. Do you remember the character that can do impressions of everything?
Yes, I know. I can't remember his name now.
Hightower.
Hightower was the tall one. Hightower was the really tall one
that could do the impressions of all the noises. So, so he's like that as well. He can like sounds. He just makes impressions of all these. It's hysterical. So anyway, yes, he isn't conventional, but he is able to have a conversation easily. Life is a lot easier. There are still some challenges, but. We get on with them, and I do feel he would not have got to this point had we not have done all the work that he's been doing over the years as well. So, yes.
Well, look, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and all the time you spent today sharing, some pretty tough memories, as well as some amazing things that came out of those memories. Neuro Frontiers is that the best place. People can find you on LinkedIn as well, of course, which is where I found you. So the internet does work, as again, once it can be positive. LinkedIn, Gemma Herbertson, and also I advise people to look out for Neuro Frontiers. Go to the website. There's loads of really cool things there that you can read and access. Other than that, thank you so much. I'd love to have you on again soon, and really appreciate the time you shared with us all today. So what a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you ever so much for having me here. Thank you.
This has been Meeting People. I've been your host, Amal Pandya. This is a podcast produced by Matt Cooper with music composed by Loverman.